My life completely changed after this evening at the mall. It wasn't anything grand or spectacular at first, but something shifted, something I didn't even realize until it was too late. I had gone to TJ Maxx to kill some time, just browsing through clothes like I always did when I needed a break from work. I wasn't expecting anything to happen, certainly not anything like this. I had seen Maxx around the store a few times. He worked in the men's department, always organizing clothes and helping customers with a smile that made him stand out in a sea of mundane retail employees. He was a bit younger than me, probably around 23 or 24, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made him seem older, more mature in a way I couldn't quite explain. Every time we crossed paths, it was just casual greetings, polite small talk, nothing special. I never gave it much thought until that evening. I had just grabbed a few shirts and was heading toward the fitting room when I saw Maxx standing near the entrance, folding some sweaters. We exchanged a quick nod, and he smiled at me in that way he always did, friendly but distant, like he didn't think anything of it. But that day, something was different. When I glanced at him, I noticed how his eyes lingered on me just a second too long. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me pause. I shrugged it off and walked into the fitting room, a bit more aware of the quiet buzzing in the air around me. Was it me? Or was it just the fact that it was one of those days where everything felt just a bit more charged? I undressed and tried on a shirt, but my mind kept wandering back to Maxx. I glanced through the mirror, half expecting to see him lurking outside, but instead, I saw him passing by, his gaze catching mine for just a moment. That moment, small as it was, felt like a spark, a strange connection that hadn't been there before. Over the next few days, I kept finding myself going back to the store. It wasn't just for the clothes anymore. There was something else pulling me in. Maxx was always there, doing his thing, folding shirts or helping customers. But each time we crossed paths, there was this undeniable shift. Every glance we exchanged seemed to last just a little longer than it should. A smile from him made my stomach flutter, and I began noticing things about him I hadn't before, like how his hair fell just right or the way his voice softened when he talked to me. It became a pattern, and though I wasn't one to usually overthink these things, it was hard to ignore the strange pull I felt every time I saw him. I tell myself it was just coincidence, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was different. One day, I grabbed a jacket from the rack and walked toward the fitting room, figuring I'd try it on just to pass the time. I didn't expect Maxx to be there, but when I walked in, I found him standing just outside the entrance, folding some jeans. He looked up when I entered, and that same look from before flashed across his face. A flicker of something deeper than simple politeness. I stopped, feeling that familiar weight in the air. "Hey," I said, trying to act normal. "How's it going?" "Good. Just another day," he replied, his tone casual, but there was something in his eyes that made me pause. "You here to try something on?" "Yeah, just this jacket," I said, holding it up. I went into the fitting room, but this time, the atmosphere felt different. It felt like something was about to happen, though I couldn't explain why. As I pulled the jacket on, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For some reason, I thought about Maxx again. How he had been looking at me lately. What was I even thinking? Was I imagining it? When I came out, there he was, standing nearby, folding clothes, but his gaze shifted to me almost immediately. There was that spark again, the unspoken connection that neither of us could ignore. "You look good in that," he said, his voice soft but sincere, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of heat across my face. I smiled awkwardly. "Thanks. I'm not sure about the fit though." "Nah, it's perfect," he replied, his eyes lingering just a little too long. For a moment, neither of us said anything, but I could feel the tension between us growing thicker. His gaze had softened, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was just a customer in a store. I felt like I was someone he cared about, or at least someone he was interested in. Hi there. Thanks for watching this far. If you're enjoying the video, leave a comment. It really helps us improve our stories. We go through every single comment. And hey, thanks again. Now let's get back to the story. The next time I went to the store, I found myself looking for any excuse to run into Maxx. It had been a week since our last interaction, and though we hadn't spoken much since then, the way things were hanging in the air between us was becoming harder to ignore. I started to feel like I was the only one noticing it, but every time our eyes met, it felt like we were both aware of something unspoken, something building. It wasn't just about the glances anymore. It was in the way he moved around the store, his body language when he spoke to me, the soft smile that now lingered longer than it ever had before. Even the smallest moments felt loaded, like when I reached for a shirt on the rack and his hand brushed mine. It happened a few times, each time feeling more deliberate, but neither of us said anything about it. We were both careful not to cross any lines, but every time we came close, it felt like something was pulling us in. One afternoon, I walked in and saw Maxx behind the counter, sorting through some merchandise. He looked up when he saw me, and his eyes softened, a slight smile tugging at his lips. I gave a quick nod, trying to keep things light, but as I made my way toward the back of the store, I felt that familiar tension bubbling under the surface. I walked around for a few minutes, pretending to browse, but the whole time, my mind kept drifting back to him. What was going on? I kept asking myself. Every time I saw him, I couldn't help but notice the way my heart raced, the way my body reacted to his presence. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, more intense, and I didn't know what to do with it. When I turned a corner, I accidentally bumped into Maxx. My heart skipped a beat as I looked up to see him standing right there, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. "Sorry," I muttered, taking a step back, but he didn't move. "It's okay," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. "You okay? You seem distracted." I hesitated, unsure if I should admit what was going through my mind, but he was so close, and the way he was looking at me made it hard to lie. "Yeah, I don't know. Something's been on my mind lately." He raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Something or someone?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Was he talking about me? The sudden realization hit me like a wave, and I couldn't hide the surprise on my face. Before I could say anything, Maxx stepped a little closer, his body just inches from mine. I could feel his breath on my skin, and it made everything feel more intense. "You know, I've been thinking about you too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a second, I couldn't process what he was saying. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. But then, as if the air between us had finally snapped, Maxx leaned in just slightly, and I could feel it, the electric tension that had been building for weeks. I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation. There was something real here, something that neither of us had been able to ignore. "What if we—" I started, my voice trailing off, unsure of how to continue. But Maxx didn't need me to finish the sentence. He reached out, brushing his hand lightly against my arm, sending a shiver down my spine. "What if we do?" he said with a teasing smile, his eyes locked on mine. That was all it took. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us, and our lips met in a kiss that felt like everything I'd been holding back for so long. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, as if neither of us could quite believe this was actually happening. But as it deepened, the uncertainty faded. I could feel his hands on my waist, pulling me closer, and the world around us seemed to disappear. It wasn't just about the kiss. It was about everything we hadn't said, everything that had been building up between us for weeks. We broke apart briefly, both of us breathing heavily, and I looked into his eyes, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Are we really doing this?" I asked, my voice shaky. Maxx smiled, his hands resting on my shoulders. "Yeah," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We are." The kiss lingered in my mind long after it ended. Maxx and I hadn't spoken much since that moment, but I could feel the shift in the air whenever we were near each other. Everything felt different now, but in the best way possible. Our usual interactions had taken on a new layer, one that was more intimate, more meaningful. But at the same time, we were still trying to keep things casual, to not let it get out of hand too quickly. We didn't tell anyone, not yet, and I think we were both nervous about what might happen if we did. But the more time we spent together, the more it felt natural. Felt right. We'd hang out at the mall just like we always had. But now it was different. There was an underlying current between us. A quiet tension that had nothing to do with the clothes we were looking at or the snacks we were picking up. Every time our hands brushed, it felt like the world stopped for a second. Every time we made eye contact, I could feel the pull between us. It was no longer just two guys hanging out. It was two people who wanted something more. One afternoon, I stopped by Maxx again just to grab a few things. It wasn't a special trip. It wasn't planned. But when I walked in and saw Max behind the counter, I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. The way his eyes lit up when he saw me made my stomach do flips. I knew he felt it too, the connection between us that had been growing stronger every day. "Hey!" I greeted him casually, trying to act normal, though I could feel my pulse quicken. "Hey!" he replied with that same smile, his eyes softening when they landed on me. "Need help with anything?" "I'm good. Just looking for some new stuff," I said, trying to act like nothing had changed, but I knew it had. As I walked past him, he leaned over the counter slightly, lowering his voice just enough so only I could hear. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" I froze for a second, my heart skipping a beat. "What?" "You know us," he said, his voice low but steady. "What happened? You can't stop thinking about it." I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to deny it, to play it cool, but the truth was he was right. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop thinking about what we had done, about how everything between us had changed in the most unexpected way. Yeah, I am," I admitted, my voice quieter now, vulnerable. "But I'm not sure what to do with it." Max smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "It means we're both figuring it out," he said. "We don't have to have all the answers right now, but I think we should stop pretending like we don't feel this." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. We didn't need to rush anything. We didn't need to have all the answers right now. We just had to be in this together, whatever this was. And for the first time, I felt okay with that. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We talked, we laughed, and though there was still a bit of nervous energy between us, it was different now. We didn't need to hide it. We didn't need to pretend like nothing had changed. Later that night, I texted Max, just a simple message, asking if he wanted to meet up again. There was no hesitation in my fingers as I hit send. I wanted to see him again to figure out what this was between us. And I knew, deep down, that I didn't have to be afraid anymore. He replied almost immediately, "I'd like that." And just like that, things had shifted again. We were stepping into something new, together. And even though it felt scary, it also felt right. After that night, everything felt like it had shifted, but not in a bad way. It was like we'd crossed a line together, one that had been there all along but neither of us had acknowledged until now. We didn't talk about it much, but the way we were around each other said everything. There was a quiet understanding between us now, a new dynamic that neither of us could ignore. Every time I saw Max, it felt different. Our conversations had a new layer, one that was more intimate, more meaningful. But at the same time, we were still trying to keep things casual, to not let it get out of hand too quickly. We didn't tell anyone, not yet, and I think we were both nervous about what might happen if we did. But the more time we spent together, the more it felt natural. Felt right. One afternoon, I walked into the store and saw Max standing near the front, organizing a display. As soon as he saw me, that familiar warmth spread across his face, and my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help but smile back. It wasn't just the way he looked at me. It was the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. "Hey!" he greeted me, his tone warm, but there was something different this time. There was an edge to it, an intensity that I hadn't noticed before. "Hey!" I replied, trying to play it cool, but my voice betrayed me. It cracked slightly, betraying the nerves that had suddenly sprung to life. He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking with every second. "You okay?" he asked softly, his eyes scanning my face like he could see right through me. "I'm good," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. There was something in the air between us now that felt almost too charged. Like at any moment, things could escalate again. Max raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk appearing on his face. "You sure? You seem a little distracted." I hesitated, unsure if I should say anything, but there was something in the way he was looking at me, something in his eyes that made me feel like he already knew. I've been thinking about us," I admitted, the words coming out before I could stop them. Max's smile softened, and he stepped even closer, his breath warm on my face. "I've been thinking about it too," he said quietly, "and I think it's time we stop pretending like nothing happened." His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to say something, to explain how confused I was, but instead, I found myself leaning into him, drawn to him like a magnet. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was everything, the connection, the intensity, the way he made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered. When his lips met mine again, I didn't pull away. This time it was different. It was real. I felt the same heat, the same pull, but there was something deeper in this kiss. Something that felt like it was rooted in something more than just desire. We broke apart, both of us breathing heavily. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. Max's hand found its way to my cheek, his thumb gently brushing against my skin. "It means we stop running from it. Whatever this is, we deal with it together." I nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of where this might go. With Max, it felt like we were on the same page, like we were both ready to embrace whatever came next. After that night, everything felt like it had shifted again, but this time in a way that didn't feel overwhelming. It wasn't just about the kiss anymore. It was about what had come after, the understanding between Max and me, the way we navigated our connection. It wasn't just a brief spark of attraction anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt real. Things between us had become comfortable, almost effortless. We started to spend more time together outside of the store, grabbing lunch, talking about everything and nothing. But every time we were together, the space between us felt like it was growing smaller, like we were drawing closer in ways I hadn't expected. Max wasn't the type to rush into anything, and I appreciated that. He didn't push for labels or demand answers. We just let things happen naturally, and for the first time, I didn't feel scared about it. The next time I went to the store, I saw Max right away. As usual, he was working in the men's section, folding shirts, looking busy. But the moment our eyes met, everything else seemed to fade. There was that unspoken understanding again, like we were on the same wavelength. "Hey," I said, walking up to him with a smile. "Hey," he replied, his voice warm. There was something different about the way he said it, though, like we were no longer just colleagues, no longer just friends. We were something else now, something deeper. "I was thinking about grabbing dinner later," I said, testing the waters. "You free?" Max's smile widened, and he stepped closer to me. "I'm always free for you," he said, his voice low, and I could feel that familiar pull between us again. It was easy now, easy to be near him, to share these small moments that felt huge all at once. We spent the rest of the evening together, just talking and laughing like we always had. But this time, there was an intimacy to it. It was like we both knew something had changed, but we didn't have to talk about it. We didn't have to figure everything out right away. We were just together, and that was enough for now. The next few days were a blur of quiet moments and shared glances. We didn't rush into anything, but there was a quiet certainty between us now. Every time we saw each other, it felt like we were getting closer, more comfortable in our new normal. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people figuring things out, side by side. Eventually, we did talk about it, about what this meant for us, and we both admitted that we were in uncharted territory. But we didn't need to have all the answers. We just needed to be together, to let things unfold as they would. And for once, I wasn't afraid of what that might look like. With Max, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't need to hide anything, didn't need to pretend. I could just be myself, completely and fully. And maybe that was all I needed.